Hey class, or anyone watching this discussion. Now, this week's discussion is going to focus on searching for exercise science articles and critically evaluating evidence. As we've progressed through this course, I've personally realized that finding research is only one part of evidence based practice. The other equally important component is determining whether the evidence is credible, relevant, and applicable to the population or the problem that you're actually studying. Now, when searching for exercise science articles, my primary database has traditionally been Google Scholar. I appreciate Google Scholar because it's easy to use, it's accessible, and provides a large number of peer reviewed sources across multiple disciplines. More recently, though, through the course, obviously last week, I've been introduced to Sport Discuss, which offers a more kind of specialized focus on exercise science and sports performance, rehabilitation, and just other related fields. Now, for my final project, which focuses on evidence-based exercise rehabilitation following stroke and cardiac events, I began searching using broad keywords such as cardiac rehabilitation, stroke rehabilitation, and exercise intervention. And once I identified relevant articles, I gradually narrowed my search using more specific terms such as functional capacity, quality of life, aerobic exercise, resistance training, and exercise-based rehabilitation. Now, one strategy that has helped me is using Boolean operators, which I also didn't know what that was, but I figured that out and found that words such as and, or, and, slash, and, or. For example, I might search stroke rehabilitation and resistance training, or cardiac rehabilitation and quality of life. And these help narrow down searches to studies that are directly relevant to my clinical question. I also use filters whenever possible to limit results to just peer-reviewed studies published within the last 10 years, which obviously is just a good practice for any kind of research, especially any kind of final project. And it just helps ensure that the evidence reflects the best current practices. Now, while finding an article is important, I think evaluating the quality of evidence is where evidence-based practice becomes most valuable. Not all studies provide the same level of evidence. When reviewing articles, one of the first things I try to examine is the study design. In general, I place greater confidence in systematic reviews, meta-analyses, randomized controlled trials, and clinical practice guidelines because they tend to provide a stronger evidence than observational studies or individual case reports. I also try to pay attention to sample size because larger studies often provide more reliable findings than studies only involving a small number of participants. Another factor I evaluate is going to be the characteristic of the population being studied. Now, this is especially important in exercise science because findings from one population may not apply to another. For example, research conducted on elite athletes may not be directly applicable to sedentary adults or individuals recovering from a stroke or a cardiac event. Now, the methodology section is another area I focus on. Earlier in this course, we discussed why reading beyond the abstract is important, and I think this directly applies to evaluating evidence. An abstract may report positive findings, but after reading the methodology section, you may discover limitations such as short intervention durations, poor control of variables, or participant characteristics that just limit the overall study's applicability. Understanding how a study was conducted helps determine whether the conclusions are actually supported by the evidence. Now, one challenge I've encountered is just the sheer volume of information available. Searching broad topics often produces hundreds or even thousands of results, making it difficult to determine where to even begin. This is something I experienced while searching for articles related to stroke and cardiac rehabilitation. Initially, my searches produced an overwhelming number of studies. To address this challenge, I learned the importance of refining search terms and developing a more focused clinical question using the PICO or PICO framework. Another challenge is going to be determining whether an article is truly relevant to the research question. Sometimes a study appears to be useful based on the title or the abstract, but after reading further, it focuses on different population, intervention, or outcome than what I am investigating. Now, this has taught me to be more selective and spend time reviewing study details before deciding whether to include an article in my evidence base. I've also learned that publication date matters. Exercise science is constantly evolving, and recommendations related to training, rehabilitation, recovery, and cardiovascular health can change as new evidence emerges. Because of this, I generally prioritize recent research while recognizing the value of landmark studies that have established foundational concepts within the field. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned, though, throughout this process is that evidence-based practice involves more than simply finding studies that support a particular viewpoint. It requires critically examining the quality of evidence and remaining objective throughout the whole process. Now, as a personal trainer, this is particularly important because clients often ask me about new training methods, recovery tools, supplements, or fitness trends. And rather than relying solely on social media claims or anecdotal experiences, evidence-based practice encourages professionals to evaluate available research before making recommendations. Now, looking ahead, I believe these research and evaluation skills will be extremely important for my future career. Whether I continue to work primarily in personal training or eventually move into exercise physiology, especially with cardiac rehabilitation in mind. The ability to locate, evaluate, and apply scientific evidence will help me provide safer and more effective exercise interventions. Now, overall, my experience searching for exercise science literature has shown me that Overall, my experiences searching for exercise science literature has shown me that finding evidence is only the first step. Equally important is going to be understanding how to evaluate study quality, identify limitations, and determine whether findings can be applied to real-world situations. These skills are essential for evidence-based practice and will continue to influence how I approach programming, rehabilitation, and professional decision-making throughout my career.